There are few more noble goals than brainstorming about ways to make sure that our descendants are going to be okay. All of these things come from the ability of the human being to dream and to have faith that the future is something that can be managed.
Reporter Matthew Kielty and musician Chad Matheny were both part of a 2014 episode of the 99% Invisible podcast called 10,000 Years that asked the same question we did in our Talking to the Future episode. How do we communicate a warning to humans 10,000 years in the future when language, symbols, and familiar technologies have all fallen away? Matt, a producer for Radiolab, was a contributor to the episode, helping to bring the story of the long-term nuclear warning messages to a much larger audience. We were able to catch Chad, aka Emperor X, live from his tour van, an artist who was asked to create a song about the Ray Cat, that biologically edited feline who would turn colors when getting too close to radiation. He wrote and recorded a folk song with the intention of creating lore around the Ray Cat, an earworm catchy enough that it could maybe, just maybe, stay stuck in the collective American head for 10,000 years. For the 10-year anniversary of this wildly popular episode of 99% Invisible, we'll discuss their experiences with nuclear semiotics, the rise of the Ray Cat and the associated public response, as well as how these future-focused thought experiments can be vital to imagining and creating a more hopeful future. I'm your host, Chelsea Weber-Smith, and this is American Hysteria. I am so excited to have these two guys on our show to talk about nuclear semiotics and to just see where this conversation goes, because I know, Matt, it's been about 10 years since the 99% Invisible episode came out that you were a part of, as well as you, Chad. And so we're basically going 10,000 years in the past.
Well, now it's 9,990 years in the future that the earworm has to last for.
Right, that's the problem that we were trying to solve for. Yeah, exactly.
It's a little bit easier.
Time goes on.
0.01% easier. That's very good.
That is good. That's a very positive way to think about it. We're chipping away at this sculpture that is time. Yes. All right. So all three of us have at some point experienced an obsession with nuclear semiotics. I'm sure a lot of our listeners became obsessed with it. So many listeners of 99% Invisible back in 2014 became obsessed with it. I want to start, Matt, with you and ask you to travel back in time and remember, how did you feel after you discovered this very odd type of discipline? And once you dove in, what was your experience like with nuclear semiotics?
I think I remember being maybe kind of like just morbidly tickled by it. Mm-hmm. It's just a weird, hard problem to solve, and one that asks a lot of your own imagination of trying to start problem solving that. And yeah, so I think for me, it was like, oh, this is strange. How do you actually go about trying to solve the problem of communicating 10,000 years into the future? Which I think when you first encounter it, it's like it feels like there has to be a relatively easy, intuitive answer. And then as you start to dig into it and realize just what happens to anything over the course of 10,000 years, the fact that things like all have a sort of half-life, that there's always some sort of constant change taking place, you realize actually how hard of a problem it is to solve. And that just, like I said, felt kind of interesting and exciting and like a thing that felt fun to tumble into. And then I think it was like a friend of mine who's like, you should just pitch that to 99% Invisible. I was like, oh, right. Yeah, I should. I'm like new in this world of radio, and like what I just thought like, oh, here's a strange thing that I encountered. And then it became this very long journey of making a thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I broke both my wrists in the middle of it, like a whole lot happened.
Whoa.
Was it because of this? Did you fall dizzy with?
It was because of the reporting. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, dizzied by encountering the scale of 10,000 years.
Hey, deep time.
Yeah.
The only way I could think of that realistically happening is if you were playing on the Brooklyn baseball team named the Raycats that came out of that podcast and like broke your wrists on the field. Is that how that happened? That's the only way I can reverse engineer that narrative.
Was there a baseball team that came out of this?
Yep, like a community softball team made jerseys, at least. I don't know if they're actually a baseball team, but there is a video of Paolo Fabri holding up a Raycats jersey and listening to Don't Change Color Kitty.
Yeah.
Yeah, this man got to experience this before he passed away. Like, beautiful moment.
Yeah.
Oh,
I know, that is incredible.
So I hope your wrists are okay, but it was worth it.
Yeah, for Paolo.
We're going to get to this explosion of Raycat pop culture. But first, let me ask you kind of the same question, Chad. What was your introduction to nuclear semiotics, and how did it affect you when you started to learn about it?
I was a child when I first hit those ideas. I don't remember exactly what I read.
A child?
Yeah, I was a weird kid.
Reading at 4.
But yeah, like, 13, 14. I was really into science fiction, still am, for philosophical reasons. Like, I'm a big believer in the future, and a big believer that, like, thinking about the future is a good and profound way to spend your time as a human being. So I think science fiction is, like, for ideological reasons, I'm a very big supporter of science fiction. So it's always been in the background. I think I read some kind of article about it maybe in my late teens. So it always been in the back of my mind. There was also maybe 60 Minutes or something piece about it in the late 80s or early 90s or late 90s. I'm not sure when. But it showed some of these things that study group, the U.S. Department of Energy, commissioned, and I remember very specifically a few of the signs, like the images that they had, and it just horrified me. There was this like sort of Edvard Munch scream, but iconized onto like a yield sign.
Yeah.
And I think that just really sat with me as a kid. Later, I think slightly after college, I read a book called A Canticle for Leibowitz by a guy named Walter Miller. Highly recommended. And it is a book that takes place 600 or 700 years in the future after a nuclear war in the plains of Texas, which have sort of reverted to this like medieval feudalist society. And this guy uncovers a illuminated manuscript on parchment, and they don't know what these abstract symbols are, but basically he rediscovers electrical engineering because some monks had preserved circuit diagrams on parchment early on in a like medieval. There was a time when everyone burned all the records because they were mad at scientists for destroying the world because of the nuclear conflict. And these monks had preserved it in these clay pots or something. And that really sat with me for a long time. And I'd always been a little bit obsessed with it from a young age.
Well, and that really sounds like they were riffing on the atomic priesthood a little bit that we talked about in our episode.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Which is one of the reasons I think I wanted to do this episode, because our show is about myths and how they form. And this was like this new thought experiment for me where it's like, how do you create knowing what we know about myths and archetypes and, the hero's journey in these stories that appear again and again in different cultures? Like, how do we encapsulate that in a myth that will last as long, like 5 times as long as the Pandora's box, which is one of the stories mentioned in the report.
Yeah, exactly. And that's such a fascinating mythological question for me. I actually have some candidates. Like, I don't think it maybe meets all of the criteria, but I'm pretty sure that some of the myths that we've created in the 20th and 21st centuries will last at least a couple hundred years, if not thousands. Like, Star Trek is a pretty good replacement for me for the Bible.
Ooh.
I think it's potential that some of the stories we've written can last that long. I know that sounds sacrilegious, and I'm not a religious person, but I'm also not a disbeliever in a higher power. But I don't know. I think it's like a useful potential civilizational technology to have these myths that remind us of universal truths like stay away from nuclear waste. But we haven't tried that one yet because we haven't, as a civilization, arrived at the point where that's known as like a universal truth. The closest we got, actually, do you know about the Georgia Guidestones?
A little bit, but please tell us about it.
I mean, I'm not an expert in them at all. It's just like, I think they were built in the 70s or something. It's an example of one person trying to leave something that'll last a really long time to warn future generations about like eternal wisdom that emerges not just from agrarian civilization or urban civilization, but from specifically technological civilization. We have to invent this now because we're further along than any civilization has been with respect to the destructive power of our technology. So new kinds of wisdom have to emerge and enter into our mythology as a result, or our future generations will continue to repeat our mistakes.
Ugh, totally same concept in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing for me is that like recording itself, the process of recording, for people who are listening who aren't familiar with my music, I'm also a recording artist outside of writing songs about radioactive cats. And it's always been very important to me, or important is the wrong word. It's been captivating to me that like you can leave something behind that people in the future will hear. There's something really, really beautiful about that notion. For example, the jokes we find etched in the side of walls in Pompeii.
Yes.
They're so bawdy and now sounding. You know, they're complaining about basically the Roman equivalent of Zoomers. They're kids these days jokes, you know, and like there's something very beautiful and universal about that. Also, some of the poetry from this is not nearly that old, but if you like, I've always felt a weird similarity between Rumi and a more recent guy, David Berman, from this band, the Silver Jews. Like there's some universal experiences in humanity, and sometimes these messages that we leave, if that can like tickle somebody in the future and let them know like, yeah, we've been around for a while. You're not the first one to experience this. You're not only not alone now, but there are people millennia ago who have experienced what you're experiencing. There's something beautiful about that too.
Oh, yeah.
But also now, potentially with the added safety dimension of being able to prevent them from having experience with radiation.
It was so beautiful to me, and it was just, it just overcame me in such a way that I didn't fully understand. And, you know, the one that really affected me was the poem, is what I kind of call it. The, this is not a place of honor. That whole thing, that whole idea of how we get to a place of understanding through very basic, like very poetic, just kind of segments was, I don't know, it just totally overcame me. And I know that for you, Matt, and for 99% Invisible, the team, when I was listening to that episode, you talked about how it was the Ray cat, which people will remember from our episode, the biologically edited cat that will glow green when it comes near radiation. So what was it like for you and the team to kind of find out about this Ray cat, and, any thoughts you have about our dear patron saint, the Ray cat?
Yeah, I just remember, I'm pretty sure that was a part of the pitch, and probably one of the only reasons that they all decided they wanted to do the story, which is that it felt, it points to the thing that I think, Chad's talking about, of just the idea of creating myth and story and embedding it in culture and pushing that forward into time with the belief that like it can actually persist. And everybody loves cats. Cats are like the internet's best friend. And so I feel like it's primed and ready-made to be something that like people are going to find cute and adorable and weird and strange and glom onto. But yeah, I don't know. It was kind of a fantastical idea that has some sort of foundational truth in a sort of poetry of the idea that a myth can actually live that long and can be understood by people 10,000 years into the future. I will say, when I was listening back to the episode, though, I was like, oh, that's never going to work. Like, that's not actually, what are we talking about? Chad's song is incredible. I love it. It's so catchy. It's a total earworm. It's like a thing that, like, hearing it again, I've been, like, humming it around as of, like, the past, 3 days.
Me too.
But I was sitting on the plane listening back to this episode, and I was like, wait, why? I can't even believe we never at any point just said, like, why don't you just not do anything?
Yeah.
Like, why isn't the solution to actually just, like, you just bury the waste? Like the likelihood that anybody's going to go digging deep enough into this like salt rock seems infinitesimal, like the odds of that happening. And if you do anything at all, you're just calling attention to the fact that this is a thing that exists and like provokes some sort of interest and curiosity. Anyway, sorry, I just kind of undercut the whole thing of the Ray Cats.
No, it's all right.
No, it's an interesting question, but I think about it in a little less deterministic of a way. So, like, yes, the idea of writing a folk song, I'll just say the obvious, the idea of writing a folk song with the expectation that the remnants of humanity will remember that the cats that we happen to be able to edit to glow green around radiation is a bad thing and that therefore they need to pick up and move. That on its face is absurd. And Fabry said that as well before he died in that interview.
Uh-oh. There's a butt coming.
There's a huge butt coming. What happened is there have been a lot of people thinking about it now, thinking about this problem. And I don't think that's the solution, but I think like the future, one of the greatest things about it is its unpredictability. And it's very possible that this attempt to address the problem, though incorrect, kicked off other paths that will lead us to some kind of solution to the problem. And I think that's the right way to think about the future. I think it's hubristic to think like, I'm going to do this thing and then everyone's going to do exactly what I'm predicting. I think that's hubris.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you should do nothing. I think quite the opposite. I think you need to give it your best shot and then leave it to the next gen to figure out what to do. And I think, I don't know, I'm pretty stoked about what that U.S. Department of Energy group did, because it certainly captivated me as a kid. And now there's a whole bunch of mid-2010s Brooklynite hipsters who thought about this thing that they didn't think about before. That's a win, right? It's a snowball effect. We're at the very beginning of it. I think it's just good praxis.
That's a great way to put it. And I mean, I believe it's Finland that we're like, we're not going to do any of this crazy shit that America is talking about. And there's a great quote that, like, apparently someone said that only Americans would think about something this outrageous, which I thought was kind of cute. I was like, that's kind of cute for us.
What are they doing in Finland?
Their plan is to just bury the waste, let it grow over, like you're saying, like just let it disappear, essentially, because they're saying anything else would be a temptation, like, you know, like this idea of a forest of thorns.
Right.
Yeah. It becomes this like tourist attraction, because in the episode we made, it's like I do this fictional thing of myself coming across the forest of thorns and how I'm like,
that was a great narrative.
Yeah, I'm going in there, man. You know, like there's no way I'm not going in the forest of thorns, no matter how many signs tell me not to.
Right.
So I think that Finland's got something there, but then there is the alternative where someone, you know, over 10,000 years eventually, who knows how many places will be mined for resources. And it's just, I like the underground idea. So it's like once you start digging, that's when you get to a warning, you know, so you don't know it's there, but then there is this safeguard. That feels like it's not a very exciting version. Like I wish it was Forest of Thorns, but, you know, I do think there are concerns with putting what essentially amounts to a monument in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
Well, the Norwegians have done kind of the opposite of the entire project, which is, I mean, you've heard of the Svalbard seed vault.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's kind of the opposite. The idea there is like, you know, people in the future will find it and then want to, like, it'll benefit them from finding it. And I think that's what makes this such a challenge, this question of how to post a warning, is it's a negative message. And I think that's a much more difficult ask for someone who's trying to communicate to the future. Saying don't do this immediately creates the possibility of doing this and immediately creates the likelihood of misunderstanding the don't part.
Yeah.
And
yes.
you're sort of doomed from the outset for that reason, I think.
Oh, definitely.
But I think I like the idea of burying it for sure. Like orbital disposal is a non-starter.
Right.
Yeah.
And as far as nuclear energy goes, like there's a big move. I live in Germany now, and there's a big movement to turn off all the fission reactors and replace them with renewable energy, which I think is great, except they're not replacing it with renewable energy. They're replacing it with coal,
right?
Which I think is like actually like existentially far more dangerous to humanity than nuclear byproducts are on the aggregate. Because I don't think fission is a long-term solution. I think we've got, you know, it depends on who you ask. It's either 10 or 100 years, but at some point we're going to get fusion. Mm-hmm. And we won't need nuclear fission anymore, and fusion won't have the same kind of disposable waste problem. So we really only need to get over this little hump. I also, in some ways, kind of, I don't regret my involvement with it at all, but I don't like the apocalyptic association.
You're part of the problem, Chad.
Always, we all are. But I do think I don't want to catastrophize too much around nuclear fission, because I think it's more dangerous to err on the side of let's put more carbon in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
They're both bad. Right now, carbon is worse.
Right.
And I'm more concerned about that. So there's no regret in that I participated in it, but I do, whenever I talk about this to people, I do tend to say things like, yes, but let's not build more coal plants and not do nuclear plants. Like, that sucks. I don't want it to be used as pro-oil propaganda, you know?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. That's kind of what I landed on as well with all the research, is like, you know, it's a really tough one. And if we had a safe disposal, then this type of energy is far, far cleaner than what we use now. And so it's kind of it's a hard one, but I agree with what you're saying for sure.
Yeah. But at the same time, so German society is deeply traumatized by the idea of radiation, because when Chernobyl went up in the 80s, these kids, a lot of the people who are of age now, remember when they were 6, 7, 8 years old, their parents saying, don't go outside, the dust will kill you.
Oh, that's a legend right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's terrifying. You don't forget that kind of stuff when you're a kid. I remember when Chernobyl went up on the TV screen, and it was scary enough just seeing the images.
Yeah.
So I understand why there's such a hard reaction against nuclear energy that's sort of stuck in the green left, which I consider myself a part of. But that's an issue where I think they err on the side of carbon production, unfortunately. That's a bigger problem right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now that's an interesting question. How do you tell, let's assume our civilization doesn't last 10,000 years. How do you let them know, hey, you see all that oil in the ground? Don't burn it. I think that's actually a next level problem for semiotics, like climate change semiotics, right?
Yeah.
How do you let people know, don't burn fossil fuels too much. We know it's easy. We know it's like the best way to do a lot of things, but you're going to screw yourself and your civilization over because the climate's going to change too fast. That's so complicated. We can't even communicate it to people alive now, let alone people 10,000 years from now. So at some point you do have to throw up your hands and be like, oh, this is just hopeless. But it's, again, I think worthy of dwelling on, because maybe it leads us to some kind of surprising solution we wouldn't have thought of otherwise.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right on. More after this. And now back to the show. So another thing that Matt, you talk about in the 99% Invisible episode, which we also did too, is the idea that there is no symbol that we have really been able to keep throughout time as meaning the same thing. Because I believe it was Carl Sagan who was going to be a part of this project of nuclear semiotics and these weird government investigations, whatever you want to call them. Mm-hmm. But he suggested the skull and crossbones, which feels like so obvious, right? Mm-hmm. And so in the episode, you looked at this skull and crossbones symbol throughout time and arrived at the conclusion that it is actually not a universal time-proof symbol. So would you talk a little bit about the Jolly Roger, as it's called?
One of my favorite things about this was that they invited Carl Sagan, and Sagan couldn't make it and literally mailed it in and was just like, yeah, skull and crossbones, done. And everyone was like, no, Carl. That's not a good answer.
Haha, Carl Sagan is not right.
Carl's not right. And yeah, it was just like, I think I remember looking at the letter. It's just like a paragraph that ends with like, clearly the answer to this is the most terrifying, treacherous symbol known to man. And it's basically, yeah, if you end up tracing the history of it, it actually goes back to the Middle Ages, and it is born out of Christian semiotics and symbols, where the skull initially was supposed to be a representation of Adam's skull. It was supposed to signify resurrection and rebirth. And I think what happened is, once shipping became as prominent as it was, and in the shipping logs, as a way to mark that somebody had died, So it shifts from resurrection, rebirth to actually just representation of death. And that takes, I think, 200 years, where it goes from resurrection to now just being a symbol of death to put down in like a log.
Oh, God, that's the opposite.
Yeah, it's diametrically opposed.
Yeah, so it does a complete 180. But then because it's like out on the seas and becomes associated with sailors and sailing, and as a representation of death, pirates then adopt the symbol as a way to create terror or signify that like we are going to attack you and we are going to kill you. We are like death incarnate on the seas, and this is our sort of symbol of the flag that we fly. And I think what was interesting is also learning that there were like a ton of different pirate symbols at the time. And I think I remember one of them was like a bleeding heart, which actually kind of sounds like nice and sweet. But so I think from what I remember from the arc of this, there was one pirate in particular, Calico Jack, who was put on trial. It's a sensational story. It gets reported all over the world. And the symbol that he used was the skull and crossbones, the Jolly Roger. And so then it became kind of the symbol of pirates. So all the other ones, the bleeding heart, those all kind of fall away. And it becomes the thing that we like collectively associate with pirates. And yeah, it becomes a symbol of danger, of a threat, of some sort of impending doom. So it gets used in the 1800s as a symbol for like poison at dye factories. The Nazis adopt the symbol as a part of their SS Death Division. So it gets darker and darker until it turns in on itself again and gets commercialized and turned into a product essentially. And like Disney with the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, and then eventually the movie, and it becomes something that they just like stick on lunchboxes, and it's like a thing you can get on a backpack, where like it's now just like a completely harmless sort of inert neutral symbol that's just like, if you think it's kind of cool looking, like maybe you like it.
Yeah, it's just like a bit Hot Topic, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. It winds its way. Ultimately, all roads lead to Hot Topic.
It's true. It really is.
But yeah, that's the long sort of trajectory of, not even that long though. That's the thing. It's just like, what are we talking? Like 500 years or something? Like,
yeah, somewhere between 5 and 1,000.
It's 1/20th of the time we would need a symbol to have stability. Oops.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I know. It's so wild. So to either of you, I pose this question. If you had to choose a symbol, is there one that you've thought of that you feel like is the most, I think that like the scream for me seems like the closest, since we have shared facial expressions, although that's not always true throughout different cultures. But is there a particular symbol that feels like the symbol that we could come closest to answering this question with?
I agree with you. For me, I can only speak on my experience when I was a kid, but the one I remember is the scream.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I think another thing might be perhaps a universally feared predator.
Yes. Okay.
Like a spider or a scorpion or something. The danger there is that maybe it's like it's worshipped as a god at some point, and then people think it's holy.
Right.
If there was a spider, I would not go in.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go in the Forest of Thorns if there was a spider sign.
Nobody wants to hang out with spiders, even if you like them. You don't want to be in the room where the spider lair is.
Right.
What I look to actually is the Voyager record. The golden record on Voyager. I think that's actually weirdly a better approach, even though we're not trying to communicate with aliens per se, but they really took a universal approach there. They used mathematical symbols that any pattern recognizing consciousness would get. The problem there is that that's not a value. You're not adding any normative content there. You're just talking about logic. So I think it becomes really difficult in a way that I haven't thought of how to imbue a value with something. There's a Star Trek episode about this, like everything, in which like somebody uses the hydrogen atom as a universal symbol of like we know what physics is. But in terms of something that's bad, we're going to have to think about in terms of the biology that we're on, the biosphere that we're in. So I'm going to go with a scary monster creature that would just be hideous to anyone, like Cthulhu or something like that,
Okay. I like that.
And that would just be what? A symbol, like a silhouette of the scary animal? Or are you talking like build?
Yeah. Or sure, 3D. Why not? Just like
build a beast. Yeah.
Build the beast.
I mean, I think we could reverse engineer this by saying, let's say we were on Mars and one of our astronauts finds a cave or like, a monolith type object. What would make us not open it? I think the answer is very, very few things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like nothing. I think that's the whole problem, is that you're going to want to open it.
Yeah, the human curiosity.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I found mine and it's the spider. I will not open that box if there's a bunch of spiders on it. So,
but wouldn't you also just be like, but are there really going to be spiders? Or is that just like a false warning because actually inside of this box is some sort of crown jewel?
Right.
Matt, it's not a risk I'm willing to take.
Yeah. I think it takes us back to the idea of the problem being unsolvable, but it nevertheless creating productive dialogue around things that we might be able to do to make it better.
Yeah.
Like, for example, just making damn sure, so 500 years in the future may be impossible, maybe 10,000 totally impossible, but 200 may be possible. So we think about things that, like, let's talk about the Jolly Roger. Maybe that would be a bad candidate, but there are other things that probably have lasted longer, like the cross, the symbol of the cross, or the crescent. For Islam, or the Star of David for Judaism. I think you do have to look back at religion to see symbols that have really lasted millennia. And there are examples. So the cross is a really interesting one because it's basically a torture device. Like, who was the comedian? It might have been Carlin or David Hicks that said, like, if I were Jesus and I came back and I saw a cross, I would run.
That's a great point.
I would get far away from that cross. That's an interesting semiotic point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I think the stability of that symbol is now about 1,500 years. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Let's start with that.
Put some crosses up.
Yeah.
Just...
but I'm saying what made it happen was a religion. So what you really want to do is like engineer a religion.
Exactly.
Which is kind of a dark sociopathic desire to do. Like, I'm going to create a false religion based on nuclear radiation. Like, I think you have to have some kind of humanistic idea here. Maybe you promulgate a humanist cult that has symbols for value positive and value negative ideas.
God, it's like L. Ron Hubbard creating Scientology. Yeah.
Absolutely. Or it's like in the Frank Herbert novels, the Bene Gesserit and the God Emperor, like promulgating a religious cult around something that they just have a very practical need for. This comes up in Philip K. Dick books a lot too. And I'm not advocating for the creation of a false religion, but I think there might be some aspects of religion, some things that really get something universal in human beings that we could take advantage of for an ultimate solution here. I don't know what those are.
But yeah, maybe it's as simple as like talking about the atomic priesthood earlier, which obviously has all sorts of connotations with the idea of like an actual sort of religious priesthood. But I mean, maybe the only thing is like you have a committee of people and there's always like the committee is eternal and it's sort of like it's knowledge and information being passed down. Like, it's so funny. I'm like, you're referencing like Philip K. Dick and other sort of like lovely sci-fi. And I'm like thinking about The Giver. Oh. Like a new giver is always selected. Somebody is always going to be initiated into this committee in which there's shared understanding knowledge of like what this place is and the harm that it can cause.
The light that never goes out.
Right. And I'm like, that I think sounds functional and possible, and doesn't even need a sort of like true sort of fantastical belief at the sort of root of it. I mean, it does actually require like an immense amount of belief, but that you don't actually need to construct a sort of significant religion.
Mm-hmm.
You just need to make sure that there are people that you can pass it on to, and there's a structure and a system.
Right.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself feels, kind of indoctrinating and sort of religious, but...
Yeah.
But not necessarily in a spiritual sense. Like, in a weird way, it kind of hacks into this, like, this meaning problem that humanity faces right now. Like, we might not agree, like, any single person about what, like, the meaning of life is or whatever, but we probably would all agree that there's eternal value in preserving conscious life as we know it. And we could call that sacred and build a religion around that. You know, that's a good thing. Basically what we're talking about is creating a humanist cult that has an atomic priesthood as its acolytes or something. I don't know. But I don't share your skepticism that it's impossible. I do share your belief that Ray Cats ain't it. But again, look, if you want to take two giant steps back, we're having a podcast talking about this thanks to these obscure, strange weirdos in the 80s who are thinking about this problem. And this is a very good thing. So let's see where we're at right now with this. I don't think it's a silly thing to ponder at all.
Well, and I agree with you. And I do think that though the Ray Cat is not a practical solution, it was the kind of beloved thing that came out of this 99% Invisible episode, as well as your song, Chad. And kind of, I would love to hear about the process of you being asked to write an earworm folk song that could potentially last 10,000 years about this Ray cat. So would you tell us how you were asked to do it, and then, you know, maybe why you were asked to do it, and then the process of actually, like, how did you come up with a song that you believed, and I know you don't necessarily believe, but that could come closest to lasting for 10,000 years?
Well, I kind of do, as not that particular song, but we'll get to that. How it happened was, at the time, Olive, Nay, Sam Greenspan was, we met at a concert that I played at their college in Florida, and they had just been supporting my music for a couple years, and we had a history of doing some like NPR work together. Like Sam did an interview of me in 2011 or 12 where I was doing a project that was sort of adjacent to this. Actually, I was taking B-sides from a record and burying them and putting on my website GPS coordinates.
Cool.
And seeing if people would like dig them up. And if they dug them up, then there was like a code they could activate it so everyone could hear an MP3 of what was on the tape. So this notion of recording and of making things and seeing if they last had always been a part of my music. So they thought of me at the time when they were working at 99PI, and they said, oh, Chad would be perfect for this. They wrote me and said, described the project. And I, of course, loved it immediately. I was like, of course I'm going to do this. So now onto the how. It wasn't super challenging because I didn't spend that long on it, if I'm being honest. Things sort of come in a flash. And I think this problem sort of lent itself so naturally to my thinking and to my like understanding of the world and the purpose of art in the world that it just sort of fell out of me. It's probably the easiest thing I've ever wrote. I wrote it on a Greyhound bus or a Peter Pan bus, I don't remember which, between Boston and New York City, and finished recording it in my friend's apartment before a concert that evening in Brooklyn. And I probably, then I spent a lot of time recording it and getting the details right and changing a few things about the words. But the idea was made very clear to me that like we have to make people imagine a future in which a song is sung that's sort of like a rite. Like a sacred communal rite, but that's also catchy that everyone would like to sing. So I was thinking about hymns and Russ Taff songs from. I was raised evangelical Christian, so despite having left the faith when I was a teenager, I still have those songs in my head. So I was thinking about those songs are super catchy. Why? And I sort of tapped into the Christian music background that I have to dig in there, and the other parts of it, which I think are an underappreciated or people don't pay attention to this part of the project enough because it's a big part of my statement, was, okay, so there's the song, so like a lavishly recorded version of it. But then the idea is it's very naive to think that the English version will last. So maybe the melody has some kind of meaning. So basically if you go on my Bandcamp page and look at it, these things just sort of get stripped down to where at some point all you hear is an 8-bit recording, sort of like a Nintendo quality recording, downsampled wave file of the melody of the song, and that's it. And full of noise. And the idea behind that is if we're in the future, but we retain some semblance of our technology now, we would probably not have much compute to spare, not have much energy to spare. So we'd want things that are really, really easy to process and that took up not a whole lot of data, because data would probably be at a premium. And then I sort of did a sonic impression of what that scary... one of the ideas was to create lithophones. So things that when wind passed through them, they sounded terrifying or unpleasant. So I did one of those. And I did wind up spending quite a bit of time on those parts of it. But the song itself, which sort of... I'll still have people asking me for that song at concerts, and it's very, very crazy because the rest of my music is quite different, to say the least. But it's always I always whenever I can, I try and fit it in if somebody asks for it, because I think people love cats. I think that's what it really comes down to.
People love
it's
cats.
A cat thing.
Yeah.
People love cats.
So my theory is that the song's relative popularity with respect to my catalog is not because people love nuclear waste, but because people love cats.
Yes. And I found it so interesting when I was doing research for this that about 10,000 years ago, there's evidence that cats became domesticated. So it literally is like our love of cats actually does extend for 10,000 years, which is hard to say about most anything else.
There you go. There's a hint.
So really quick before we keep going, I want to just play the song for our audience. So listen up, see if you think it's going to last 10,000 years, everyone.
I've been told that this is an earworm, and I apologize if you're singing this later on today. It's quite likely based on some feedback that I've got, so my bad. But try and enjoy it. It'll go away after a day or two.
Chad, what are you talking about? This is a part of the mission. No. You'll never be able to get it out of your head.
Bad.
Mission accomplished.
It'll become your own personal hell until you die.
And if anyone wants to, I'm a fairly easy person to find. So if anyone wants me to write another cult earworm about some kind of esoteric project of yours involving science, hit me up.
Get in touch.
Don't change color, kitty, keep your color, kitty, stay that pretty gray. Don't change color, kitty, keep your color, kitty, keep sickness away. Don't change color, kitty, keep your color, kitty, please, cause if you do, or glow your luminescent eyes, you're all gonna have to move. So don't change color, kitty, keep your color, kitty, stay that pretty gold. Don't change color, kitty, keep your color, we'll keep you from the cold. So don't change color, kitty, keep your color, cause you need your kind around. The minute you change your looks, we're bringing you with us out of town. So don't change color, kitty, keep your color, kitty, no, I don't know why. Don't change color, kitty, keep your color, kitty, God said it's not right. So don't change color or flash your eyes, cause Lord knows if you do. I hope you think it's cozy in your travel case, because it's time to move. Don't change color, kitty, keep your color, kitty, stay that midnight black. The radiation changing flies can kill, and that's a fact. The radiation, whatever that is something we don't want. Cause it withers our crops and it burns our skin and it turns our livestock on. So don't change color, little kitty, don't flash your eyes. So don't change color, little kitty, don't flash your eyes. So don't change color. Flash your eyes.
More after this. And now, back to the show. Okay, so once this song came out, once the episode came out, there was a really big response to, both things. And it got people really thinking about nuclear semiotics, and it really got people making fan art and all kinds of different things that maybe you didn't expect. So maybe I'll start with you, Matt. What was the response that you remember to this thing that you kind of, pulled out of thin air and pitched and it kind of took on a life of its own?
Great question. I was so obsessed with getting a job at that point in my life that I finished this, I dropped it, I didn't think about it. I saw the comments on the 99% Invisible website were blowing up, and I was like, oh, this clearly struck a little nerve, which I think, going back to what my initial interest in it was and what clearly was happening for people listening, is that it's just such a tantalizing problem to think about, and is kind of just a fun puzzle to logic over for a little while and try and piece together what you think you have, if you have the answer to it. So I watched it blow up in the comment section. I didn't really think about it too much. I then saw that clearly it was a big enough episode that I think when 99% Invisible did their Kickstarter campaign, they made, I think that's the softball t-shirt, Chad, is I think they made that shirt as a gift or kickback for kickstarting another season of the show. And so that was the thing. So it was clearly a popular episode. But then I was truly shocked when one day I got an email that this young man was making a short doc about it, where he was going to take the shirt and meet Paolo Fabri, who and I forget who his collaborator was, who they conceived of the Ray Cat idea. He was going to interview him because there was like this other young guy at like, I can't remember if it was Columbia or MIT or something, who was starting to work with genetic manipulation in order to make like simple cell organisms like turn color when exposed to, I don't know if it was actually radiation, if it was some sort of other exposure, but had been inspired by the episode to try and start doing this sort of research, which I truly couldn't believe that was happening. And so that was pretty amazing. But no, it's like they reran the episode recently. I think they like tacked it onto the back of an episode about the Mr. Yuck symbol, you know, the green yuck face. And I think Roman sets it up again with like, this is like one of our most popular episodes. But yeah, I don't know. It's so funny to think also that, Chad, that you have like the people request the song. For me, it's not a thing that comes up until maybe every once in a while, like Chelsea, I'll get an email like I got from you or something where it's just like, hey, this thing, that thing. Or like somebody from my past will reach out and be like, oh, you did that 99% Invisible story.
I've had people who know my music and who know about this song separately, who haven't connected the two yet.
Oh, that it's you. That's incredible.
Yeah, like I have people who've written me. It's like I was reading the Wikipedia page about nuclear semiotics, and your song is mentioned at one point. And then they discover it.
Oh, is it? Oh, that's so funny.
You guys made the wiki.
Yeah, that's amazing. The song called 10,000 Year Earworm. Oh, I forgot the title of this.
10,000 Year Earworm to Discourage Resettlement Near Nuclear Waste Repositories. The catchiest title of all time.
Yeah. Really catchy title.
I also had the same reaction as you when the film, this French guy, I forget his name, but he a real sweetheart, and he did some really cool animations of the whole concept that made it clear. Oh, right. I think in a way that you can't even really do on podcast, and it was so cool. And like when I saw Paulo Fabri tapping his foot and holding that jersey, knowing that my song was being played off of Bandcamp, my thought was like, okay, cool, I have accomplished my mission in this world. Like, that's cool. I can just relax and like eat Doritos for the rest of my life, because like I've made a kind of contribution that intersects with somebody very serious like that. And it blew me away, man. It was just one of those moments. It's like, this is why we do it. This is why we make art and culture, because it's so thrilling to be a part of. Like, obviously, to think that we've come up with a solution is very, very hubristic, but like to be a part of the conversation is an honor. You know, that's how I feel about it.
And that's what it feels like, is this amazing conversation that happened between so many people all at once, all over the internet. And just so our audience knows, the documentary is called The Ray Cat Solution, and it's just a mini doc, and it is fabulous, and I highly recommend it as well. The end of the 99% Invisible episode that I really liked the message, and that was maybe the best way to think about the future and 10,000 years in the future is this thought experiment, sure, but also taking care of people now, because there are these issues where different plants have failed in different ways, and, you know, maybe not in the giant way we think of like Chernobyl, but smaller things that have affected people all over the country in, you know, a lot of times in low income or Black communities, or just places where there wouldn't be that same immediacy to fix the problem, which of course is absolutely horrifying. But what do you both think about this idea of taking care of the now and taking care of, you know, what we've talked about, carbon emissions, things around climate change? Like, do you think that in itself kind of carries through time and maybe is a big part of the solution? I mean, maybe that's obvious, but I'm curious what you both think about that.
Is the idea that ensuring that we're actually sort of like making attempts, like concerted efforts to take care of people here and now, if that in and of itself and that sort of like mission, if that is something that just carries forward as a way to protect future generations?
Yes. Yeah.
To which I'm like, yeah, I would think so. Of course, of like any sort of like deeply humanistic ideology of like actually sort of caring for, I mean, if you just even draw a circle around people, could probably only mean that it reverberates out into the future as like a continued exercise in protecting and caring for other people. But I think like what the thing, and I think Sam probably, I feel like Sam pulled up that specific example and wanted to end the piece with that. So just to try and give credit, although I don't even really remember anymore at this point. But I think it's like you just see like the continual failure of our ability to do that. A sort of like, I mean, you don't want to make any sort of claims about human nature, but like our incapability of actually caring for one another in a sufficient way that you can sort of put faith in that is going to carry forward and be like the basis for how we continue to like protect one another. And it becomes a really interesting problem to try and solve, which I think is why it's like fun to think about. And even though at the base of it, it is like, it's this question of trying to make sure that harm doesn't happen to other people. In order to achieve it, it's like, isn't it so fun that we get to come together here at this like the waste isolation pilot plant and break up into these two groups, and Michael Brill is like drawing landscapes of thorns, and like it's a fantastical, amazing thing to kind of like imagine and try and solve. Whereas like, how do we just actually help these poor people to make sure that they're not killed by like processing or creating this waste or like conducting this work? That's like drudgery and probably actually like meaningfully costful in ways that people don't want to deal with.
I'll answer that by saying that I will make a claim about human nature, which is that I suspect that we will prosper in the now proportionate with our ability to project into the future our world. Like, I think that the most basic idea of this is the having of children is a gesture of faith that there's going to be a world for them. And I think there are no more profound questions than can this continue? Should this continue? This thing that we're doing. So the ability to think about what to do for the future, I think, will inevitably impact our lives now. I think in very concrete ways. So many things that we take for granted now is just like basic elements of our technological civilization were first conceived of and popularized as elements in science fiction narratives. I don't want to say all of the cliches, but they're there. iPads, the whole notion of telecommunication, flight, all of these things come from the ability of the human being to dream and to have faith that the future is something that can be managed. And I think that there are few more noble goals than brainstorming about ways to make sure that our descendants are going to be okay. I think that's a deep gesture of care. And then, like, so when it comes down to where the rubber meets the road about whether or not we spend billions on nuclear waste repositories, I think the thing to consider there is like, okay, great, let's do fission when we've got it, but is that really what we want to be doing? Like, how about windmills and solar? How about efficiency in our energy budget at all? Maybe we don't need to use so much power. I think that's where the real care for the future comes from, repositioning our civilization such that it can be more sustainable in a deep, meaningful way. But I think that won't happen. You have to get people excited about that.
Right.
You can't make it merely a pious sacrifice. It has to be something that we're all kind of on board for, this narrative of humanity that we're all a part of, whether we were willing to be or not. That's what I think culture does. And ultimately, this whole Raycats idea at this point is culture. But I would very, very strongly push back against anyone who said it is just culture. Because I think this conversation that it creates and the faith that it cannot help but engender in the future of humanity, silly, flawed, ridiculous, naive humanity, is something that I value a lot. And I think we should keep doing both the thinking towards the future and the taking care of people now.
Well, I think that's a lovely place to stop. So I just want to thank you both. This conversation was very, very fun.
Super fun.
And I just love talking to you both and really just I love that episode. I think it sparked a bit of a revolution in thought experiments. So thank you for your work on that. And thank you for being willing to come on the show.
Well, thank you. This was fun.
Thank you guys for making the podcast culture that allows crazy things like this to actually get traction. Y'all are doing God's work. More power to you.
This was American Hysteria. You can find Chad's music at emperorx.net, and you can find Matt on Twitter at Matt_Kielty. You can find the link to both of them in our show notes. If you want to get more of our show, you can head to patreon.com/American Hysteria or subscribe on Apple Plus. You'll get ad-free episodes and you'll get access to Hysteria Home Companion, another podcast that I do with our producer Miranda, where we tell you stories that were left out of the episodes or stories that we think that you'll find very interesting. There's a whole bunch of episodes just waiting for you if you go to patreon.com/American Hysteria or subscribe on Apple Plus. It's the best way you can help support our show and make sure that we can keep going for 10,000 years. American Hysteria's producer and editor is Miranda Zickler, and our associate producer is Riley Swedelius Smith. And I'm your host, Chelsea Weber Smith. If you go to AmericanHysteria.com, you can get some of our merch, or you can leave us a message on our Urban Legends hotline and tell us a tale that you remember from growing up, and we might do a whole investigation about it. It's AmericanHysteria.com. Thanks as always for listening, and I hope you have a great week.